Eleanor Roosevelt was a New York or a transformative political figure who became one of the most influential yet unconventional first ladies in American history. Eleanor Roosevelt, political activist, diplomat, and humanitarian, was born in New York City on October 11, 1884. She came from one of America's most prominent families. She had a commanding presence with her persistent voice and genuine compassion for humanity. Eleanor's early years were marked by tragedy and profound insecurity. She attended a Lenswood Academy in England, graduating as a confident young woman in 1902. Her education there shaped her understanding of social responsibility and justice, though her later career would test those principles in ways she could never have imagined. After returning from England, Eleanor became involved in social work in New York City, though she approached her charitable work with the privileged detachment common to young women of her class. She volunteered at settlement houses and joined the Junior League, beginning to see poverty and injustice firsthand. During this time, Eleanor was already developing her sense of social obligation and public service. She joined various reform organizations and became active in charitable affairs. Her natural empathy for suffering quickly set her apart from other young society women. In 1905, Eleanor married her distant cousin Franklin Delano Roosevelt, whom she had known since childhood. Franklin was an ambitious and charismatic young man who had political aspirations. She became his partner in many ways, supporting him in political matters and eventually helping him navigate his career. Their marriage was complicated, marked by both partnership and pain, and Franklin's influence on Eleanor's development cannot be overstated. They would have 6 children together, though one died in infancy, and the family remained central to Eleanor's identity throughout her extraordinary public career. In the early years of marriage, Eleanor struggled with her role as wife and mother. She was dominated by her imperious mother-in-law, Sarah Delano Roosevelt, who controlled the household and made most decisions about the children's upbringing. Eleanor felt inadequate and depressed, trapped in a conventional role that stifled her growing desire for independence and meaningful work. Franklin's political career took him to Albany when he was elected to the New York State Senate in 1910, and later to Washington when he was appointed Assistant Secretary of the Navy in 1913. Eleanor followed dutifully, managing households and raising children while Franklin pursued his ambitions. In 1918, Eleanor discovered that Franklin was having an affair with her social secretary, Lucy Mercer. The discovery devastated Eleanor and fundamentally changed their marriage. She offered Franklin a divorce, but for political and family reasons they remained married. However, their relationship became more of a political partnership than a romantic union. The betrayal freed Eleanor in unexpected ways, pushing her toward independence and her own public career. She would never again be simply an appendage to her husband's ambitions. The defining moment of both Roosevelt's lives came in 1921 when Franklin contracted polio and was left permanently paralyzed from the waist down. Eleanor became his connection to the outside world during his recovery. She attended political meetings on his behalf, reported on conditions she observed, and gradually developed her own political voice. She worked with the Women's Trade Union League and became active in Democratic Party politics. Her activism during the 1920s transformed her from a shy, insecure woman into a confident political figure in her own right. Eleanor became close friends with several women activists, including Nancy Cook and Marion Dickerman. These friendships provided emotional support and political education. Together, they established the Valkill Furniture Factory and the Todhunter School, where Eleanor taught history and literature. These ventures gave Eleanor independence and purpose. She was developing her own identity separate from Franklin, her own causes, and her own public presence. When Franklin was elected governor of New York in 1928, Eleanor continued her activism while serving as First Lady of New York. She maintained her teaching position and her reform work. She inspected state institutions, reporting conditions to Franklin. She became his eyes and ears, traveling where he could not go because of his disability. This pattern would continue when Franklin became president, but on a vastly larger scale. In 1932, Franklin was elected President of the United States in the midst of the Great Depression. Eleanor was reluctant to become First Lady, fearing she would lose her independence and be confined to ceremonial duties. She understood that the role traditionally required women to be decorative and silent, hosting teas and managing social events. Eleanor was determined to be different. She would redefine what a First Lady could be and do. As First Lady, Eleanor transformed the role completely. She held regular press conferences, the first Lady to do so, and she restricted them to female reporters only, ensuring that news organizations would have to hire women. She wrote a daily newspaper column called My Day that was syndicated in newspapers across the country. She gave lectures, radio broadcasts, and traveled extensively throughout the United States. She became Franklin's representative to the American people, visiting coal mines, slums, and farms, seeing conditions firsthand and reporting back to the president. Eleanor became an advocate for the poor, for African Americans, for women, and for young people. She pushed Franklin to include more women in his administration. She supported anti-lynching legislation, though Franklin refused to back it for political reasons. She resigned from the Daughters of the American Revolution when they refused to allow Marian Anderson, a black opera singer, to perform at Constitution Hall. She then arranged for Anderson to sing at the Lincoln Memorial instead, in a concert attended by 75,000 people. The gesture was both symbolic and substantive, demonstrating Eleanor's commitment to racial justice. Eleanor's activism sometimes embarrassed Franklin and his advisors. Her outspokenness on controversial issues created political problems. Conservative critics attacked her as meddling and inappropriate. They mocked her appearance, her voice, and her activism. Cartoonists drew cruel caricatures, yet Eleanor persisted, believing she had a moral obligation to speak for those who had no voice. She received thousands of letters from ordinary Americans seeking help, and she tried to respond to as many as possible, often intervening with government agencies on behalf of desperate citizens. During the 1930s, Eleanor became particularly concerned with the plight of young people during the Depression. She supported the National Youth Administration and worked to create opportunities for jobless youth. She was also deeply involved with civil rights issues, meeting regularly with African American leaders like Mary McLeod Bethune and Walter White. She used her influence to push for fair treatment of blacks in New Deal programs, though she could not overcome the racism embedded in American society and politics. When World War II began in Europe in 1939, Eleanor supported aid to Britain and France, though she remained committed to keeping America out of the war as long as possible. After Pearl Harbor, she threw herself into the war effort. She visited American troops stationed around the world, traveling to Britain, the South Pacific, and the Caribbean. She inspected hospitals, talked with soldiers, and reported on morale and conditions. Her visits boosted troop morale enormously. Soldiers appreciated that the president's wife cared enough to visit them in remote and dangerous locations. Eleanor also advocated for fair treatment of Japanese Americans, though she could not prevent their internment in concentration camps. She visited the camps and spoke against the injustice, but Franklin's administration maintained the policy throughout the war. Eleanor's opposition to internment was principled but ineffective, demonstrating the limits of her influence. She could advocate and protest, but ultimate decisions remained with Franklin and his advisors. Franklin died suddenly on April 12, 1945, just as World War II was ending in Europe. Eleanor was devastated but also in some ways liberated. She assumed her public career was over, that she would retire to private life. She was 60 years old and had been in the public eye for over a decade. She looked forward to a quieter life at Valkill, her cottage in Hyde Park. However, the new president, Harry Truman, had other plans for Eleanor. In December 1945, Truman appointed Eleanor as a delegate to the United Nations General Assembly. It was an inspired choice. Eleanor brought moral authority, international recognition, and genuine commitment to the UN's mission of preventing future wars. She accepted the appointment with some trepidation, doubting her qualifications for such important work. She need not have worried. Her work at the United Nations would become her greatest achievement. Eleanor was appointed to the UN Commission on Human Rights and was elected its chairman. The Commission's task was to draft an international Bill of Rights that would establish universal standards for human dignity and freedom. Eleanor led the effort with determination and diplomatic skill. She navigated between communist nations that emphasized economic rights and Western nations that emphasized political freedoms. She managed conflicts between secular and religious perspectives, between developed and developing nations. The work was painstaking and often frustrating. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted by the UN General Assembly on December 10, 1948. Eleanor had worked tirelessly for nearly 3 years to achieve this result. The declaration proclaimed that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights, entitled to freedom of thought, expression, and religion, protected from torture and arbitrary arrest. It was not a treaty and had no enforcement mechanism, but it established a moral standard that would inspire human rights movements around the world for decades. Eleanor called it her greatest accomplishment. After leaving the UN in 1953, when the Republican Eisenhower administration took office, Eleanor remained active in public life. She continued writing her newspaper column and giving lectures. She traveled extensively, visiting the Soviet Union, India, Japan, and many other countries. She remained a voice for liberal causes, supporting civil rights, nuclear disarmament, and the United Nations. She became an elder stateswoman of the Democratic Party, though she held no official position. In the 1950s, Eleanor became increasingly involved in the civil rights movement. She supported the Supreme Court's decision in Brown v. Board of Education and advocated for school desegregation. She met with civil rights leaders including Martin Luther King Jr. She used her column and her speeches to advocate for racial justice, though she sometimes counseled patience and gradualism in ways that frustrated younger activists. Her commitment to civil rights was genuine, but shaped by her generation's assumptions about social change. Eleanor supported Adlai Stevenson for president in 1952 and 1956, campaigning actively on his behalf despite his defeats. In 1960, she initially opposed John F. Kennedy's nomination, preferring Stevenson, but she eventually campaigned for Kennedy after he won the nomination. Kennedy appointed her to chair his commission on the status of women, bringing her expertise to issues of gender equality. She was working on women's rights issues until the end of her life. Eleanor's final years were marked by continued activism despite declining health. She was diagnosed with aplastic anemia, a serious blood disorder, but continued her work as long as she could. She gave her last public speech in 1962, still advocating for human rights and social justice. She remained engaged with current events and concerned about the future. On November 7, 1962, Eleanor Roosevelt died at her home in New York City. She was 78 years old. The cause of death was cardiac failure resulting from her anemia. Eleanor's funeral was attended by presidents, diplomats, and ordinary citizens whose lives she had touched. She was buried beside Franklin at Hyde Park. Tributes poured in from around the world. President Kennedy called her one of the great ladies in the history of the world. Adlai Stevenson said she would rather light candles than curse the darkness. Eleanor's legacy is profound and multifaceted. She transformed the role of First Lady from ceremonial figurehead to active political participant. She championed civil rights, women's rights, and human rights when such advocacy required courage. She used her position and her voice to speak for the marginalized and the powerless. She demonstrated that a woman could be a significant political figure in her own right, not merely as someone's wife. Her work on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights remains her most enduring achievement. Modern historians recognize Eleanor as one of the most important American women of the 20th century. They acknowledge that her activism, while sometimes cautious by today's standards, was remarkably progressive for her time. They note that her commitment to social justice was rooted in genuine compassion and moral conviction. They understand that her transformation from insecure young woman to confident global leader was achieved through determination, hard work, and willingness to grow beyond the constraints of her upbringing. Yet Eleanor's legacy also includes contradictions. She advocated for racial justice but sometimes counseled African Americans to be patient. She supported women's rights but accepted traditional gender roles in some contexts. She championed the poor but never fully understood their lived experiences. She was a product of privilege who spent her life trying to use that privilege for good, but she could never entirely escape the limitations of her class and generation. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Eleanor Roosevelt is her capacity for growth and transformation. She evolved from a shy, conventional society woman into a bold advocate for human rights. She overcame personal tragedies and disappointments to become a force for social change. She learned to use her voice and her position to advance causes she believed in, despite criticism and ridicule. Her life demonstrates that people can transcend their circumstances and their limitations through commitment to something larger than themselves. Eleanor represents a particular type of American leader, the privileged reformer who uses access and influence to advance social justice. History offers many such figures, people who could have lived comfortable, conventional lives but chose instead to challenge injustice and advocate for change. Eleanor's achievement was not that she was perfect or that she succeeded in all her goals, but that she tried consistently and courageously to make the world more just and humane. In the end, Eleanor Roosevelt was neither a saint nor a radical, but rather a woman of extraordinary compassion and determination who used her position to advance human dignity. Her legacy includes both the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and a model of engaged citizenship that inspired generations. She is remembered today for her advocacy, her courage, and her unwavering commitment to human rights. This is perhaps incomplete recognition for a woman who transformed American political life and influenced global human rights standards, but history often struggles to capture the full measure of transformative lives. Eleanor's life proves that one person, even starting from a position of weakness and insecurity, can make an enormous difference through persistence, courage, and commitment to justice.